A Father's Love, The Journey of Hope. Mandla stared at the picture of his wife, Nomusa, on the living room wall, his heart heavy with grief that still hadn't left him after all these years. She had passed away giving birth to their youngest daughter. And though Mandla had tried to move forward, the pain still lingered. He looked around the small house, filled with laughter and joy once upon a time, now dulled by the sorrow of loss. His daughters were upstairs, likely helping the youngest get ready for bed. Mandla had always imagined his life with Nomusa would be different. They'd planned for a big family, and after having 3 beautiful girls, Ayanda, Nandi, and Zinle, they decided to try for a boy. Mandla had wanted a son, not out of preference for a boy over a girl, but out of tradition, to carry on his name. But fate, in its cruelest twist, took Nomusa during childbirth. Instead of the son they had prayed for, another girl, Thando, was born on the same night Nomusa died. Thando had been a beautiful baby, with the same bright eyes and curly hair that Nomusa had. When Mandla first saw her, cradled by the nurse at the hospital, the joy of her arrival was tainted by the grief of his wife's death. He wasn't sure how he was going to raise 4 daughters alone. He wasn't sure if he had it in him to love Thando the way she deserved, not after losing the love of his life in the process. The early days were the hardest. His daughters were confused and heartbroken, too young to fully grasp what had happened. Ayanda, the eldest, was only 7 at the time. She tried to step up, trying to help her father with the younger girls, even though she, too, was lost without her mother. Nandi and Zinle, both still toddlers, clung to Mandla for comfort, and he did his best to be both mother and father to them, even when his own grief threatened to swallow him whole. As the years passed, Mandla learned to navigate life as a single father. He worked as a school teacher in a small township in Johannesburg, and though the pay wasn't much, he made it work. Every morning, he would walk his girls to school before heading to his classroom, and every afternoon, they would come home together, hand in hand. The routine was comforting, and Mandla's love for his daughters grew with every passing day. He found joy in the little moments: Ayanda's sharp wit, Nandi's creativity, Zinle's infectious laughter, and even baby Thando's quiet resilience. Mandla thought often about Nomusa during those years. He wondered if she would be proud of the father he had become, if she would approve of how he was raising their girls. He missed her every day, but the love he had for his daughters was enough to keep him going. They were his reason for everything, his entire world. But just as things began to stabilize, just as the grief had dulled to a manageable ache, life threw another curveball. Ayanda, at the age of 14, began to feel ill. It started with fatigue. She was always tired, even after a full night's sleep. Then came the bruises, which appeared on her arms and legs without explanation. She became pale, and her usual energy was replaced with a sluggishness that Mandla couldn't ignore. Worried, Mandla took Ayanda to the doctor. The initial tests came back inconclusive, but the doctor wasn't optimistic. More tests were needed, but the mention of words like blood disorder and leukemia sent a chill down Mandla's spine. He had never been one to panic, but the thought of losing Ayanda, his firstborn, the daughter who had grown up too fast after her mother's death, was more than he could bear. A few weeks later, the diagnosis was confirmed. Ayanda had leukemia, and the treatment required was expensive, more than Mandla could afford on his modest salary as a school teacher. Mandla's world came crashing down around him. The weight of the news was unbearable. How could this happen to Ayanda, the girl who had sacrificed so much to help raise her younger sisters? How could life be so cruel, to take away his wife and now threaten to take away his daughter? The doctors were clear. Ayanda's best chance for survival was aggressive treatment chemotherapy, regular hospital visits, medications that cost more than Mandla made in a month. He couldn't do it alone. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He couldn't save his daughter. In the days that followed, Mandla barely slept. His nights were filled with anxiety. Pacing the small living room while his daughters slept upstairs. He couldn't let them see how scared he was, how hopeless he felt. Ayanda had always been the strong one. The one who held the family together after Nomusa's death, and now she needed him to be strong for her. But how could he be strong when he couldn't afford the treatment she needed to survive? Then one night, an idea came to him. It was a desperate thought, one that made his stomach churn, but he couldn't shake it. There was a wealthy family in the community, the Kumalos, known for their charitable work. They had no children of their own, but they were known to sponsor children from underprivileged communities, providing them with the education and resources they needed to succeed. What if Mandla reached out to them? What if he asked them to adopt Ayanda, to take her in and provide the treatment she needed? It was an unthinkable option, giving away his daughter, but the alternative was even worse. If he didn't do something soon, Ayanda might not survive. Mandla spent weeks agonizing over the decision. He couldn't talk to anyone about it, not even Ayanda. How could he explain to her that he was considering giving her away to strangers? How could he look her in the eye and tell her that he couldn't save her, that he wasn't enough? Finally, after weeks of sleepless nights, Mandla made the call. He reached out to the Kumalos, explained the situation, and begged them to help. They were kind and understanding, and after a few meetings, they agreed to take Ayanda in. They promised to provide the best medical care available, to treat her like their own daughter, and to give her the life she deserved. The day Ayanda left was the hardest day of Mandla's life. He packed her bags in silence, unable to find the words to explain why he was doing this. Ayanda didn't protest. She understood what was happening, even if she didn't agree with it. She hugged her sisters tightly, tears streaming down her face, and whispered promises that she would come back to them one day. Mandla watched as Ayanda got into the Kumalos' car, her face pale and tear-streaked, and felt like his heart was being ripped out of his chest. He had done what he thought was best for her, but it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. He had given up his daughter in the hopes that she would survive, but now he was left with an emptiness that nothing could fill. In the weeks that followed, the house was quiet. Nandi and Zinle were confused and hurt, unable to understand why their father had given Ayanda away. They didn't know about the leukemia, about the treatments she needed. They only knew that their sister was gone, and they blamed Mandla for it. Thando, too young to fully grasp what had happened, sensed the tension in the house and clung to Mandla for comfort. But even her presence wasn't enough to lift the darkness that had settled over their home. Mandla tried to visit Ayanda as often as he could, but each visit was bittersweet. She was getting stronger. The treatment was working, but the distance between them grew with each passing day. The Kumalos were kind and welcoming, but Mandla couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost Ayanda forever. She was no longer his daughter, not in the way she used to be. Months passed, and then one day, Ayanda stopped answering his calls. The Kumalos told him she was traveling abroad for better treatment, but the lack of communication terrified him. He had no way of contacting her, no way of knowing if she was okay. The silence stretched on for months, and Mandla began to fear the worst. What if she didn't survive? What if she had died far away from home, and he hadn't even been there to say goodbye? His financial situation worsened as well. The school where he taught reduced his salary, and he struggled to make ends meet. Every day was a battle. Not just to provide for his remaining daughters, but to keep himself from falling apart. The guilt weighed heavily on him. Had he made the right decision? Had he done the right thing by giving Ayanda away? Or had he failed her, just like he had failed Nomusa? Then, one evening, just as the sun was setting, a mysterious envelope arrived at his door. Inside was a plane ticket to Cape Town, and a letter asking him to attend a prestigious award ceremony. Mandla was confused. Why would anyone invite him to such an event? He hadn't done anything noteworthy, hadn't made any contributions that would warrant such an invitation. But with nothing left to lose, he decided to go. He left Nandi and Zinle with a trusted neighbor and boarded the plane to Cape Town, unsure of what awaited him. When he arrived at the Grand Hall in Cape Town, the sheer size of the event overwhelmed him. Mandla had never seen anything like it. The opulence of the venue, the glittering chandeliers, and the crowd of well-dressed attendees made him feel out of place in his modest suit. He clutched the invitation tightly, his heart pounding in his chest, as he wondered why he had been summoned to such an event. The suspense gnawed at him, but he pushed forward, taking a seat in the back row, quietly observing the proceedings. As the event began, Mandla watched with little interest as one award after another was presented to various dignitaries and philanthropists. The speeches droned on, but Mandla's mind was elsewhere, on his daughters back home, on Ayanda, wherever she might be. He didn't belong here. He was just a simple man, a father who had lost so much and was still losing. He felt a lump form in his throat and began to contemplate leaving. Maybe this invitation was a mistake after all. Just as he was about to stand up and slip out of the hall unnoticed, the speaker on stage made an announcement that froze him in his tracks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the next award goes to a truly remarkable young woman, a survivor, a fighter, and an inspiration to us all. She has turned her personal battle with illness into a mission to help others, founding a program that provides life-saving treatments to children suffering from leukemia across South Africa. Please welcome to the stage Miss Ayanda Khumalo. Mandla's heart stopped. For a moment, he thought he must have misheard. The name echoed in his ears. Ayanda Khumalo. His Ayanda? He sat frozen in his seat as the applause filled the room, his eyes glued to the stage, and then, out of the spotlight, she appeared. Ayanda. She was older now, more mature, but there was no mistaking her. Her face had lost the pallor that once plagued her. Her hair was styled neatly, and she was dressed in a beautiful gown that seemed to glow under the stage lights. She walked confidently across the stage, carrying herself with a grace and strength that Mandla had never seen before. The audience cheered, but Mandla could only stare, tears filling his eyes. As Ayanda reached the microphone, her gaze swept over the audience, and for the briefest of moments, her eyes met her father's. She paused, a flicker of emotion crossing her face, and then she smiled. The same warm smile Mandla remembered from when she was a little girl. "Good evening, everyone," Ayanda began, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you for this incredible honor, but tonight I want to share a story. It's a story about sacrifice, about love, and about the people who shape our lives in ways we can never fully understand until much later." Mandla leaned forward in his seat, his hands trembling as he listened to his daughter speak. "When I was 14 years old, I was diagnosed with leukemia," Ayanda continued. "It was the hardest time of my life, not just because of the illness, but because of what it meant for my family. We couldn't afford the treatment I needed. My father, Mandla, did everything he could to take care of me and my sisters, but he was just one man. He had already sacrificed so much after my mother's death. I knew he couldn't bear the thought of losing me too, but there was only one option left for him. Ayanda paused, her voice softening. My father made the hardest decision of his life. He gave me up for adoption to a family who could afford to save me. I can't imagine the pain that caused him, but he did it out of love, and because of that love, I'm standing here today. I survived because of him. Everything I've done since, everything I've accomplished, has been because my father put my life ahead of his own happiness. Tears streamed down Mandla's face as he listened to Ayanda's words. He had always questioned whether he had made the right decision, whether he had failed as a father by giving her away. But hearing Ayanda speak now, he realized that she had never truly been lost to him. She had always been his daughter, no matter where she was or who had taken her in. The Kumalos gave me the medical care I needed, and for that, I'll be forever grateful, Ayanda continued. But it was my father's love that gave me the strength to keep fighting. He may not be rich in money, but he's rich in love, and that's worth more than any treatment or medicine. The audience was silent, moved by her words, and Ayanda's voice cracked with emotion as she reached the end of her speech. Tonight, I want to dedicate this award to my father, Mandla. He's the reason I'm here. He's the reason I'm alive. And now, it's my turn to help him, to give back to the man who gave me everything. With that, Ayanda stepped away from the microphone and walked off the stage. The applause was thunderous, but Mandla barely heard it. He was too overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. His daughter had not only survived, but had thrived. She had become something far greater than he had ever imagined, and she was coming back to him. As the applause died down, Mandla felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see Ayanda standing before him, tears in her eyes, her arms open wide. "Papa," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I told you I'd come back." Mandla stood up, and in an instant they were in each other's arms. He held her tightly, sobbing into her shoulder, as all the pain, guilt, and fear he had carried for so long melted away. Ayanda held him just as tightly, whispering reassurances in his ear. "I'm so proud of you, my girl," Mandla choked out through his tears. "I've missed you so much." "I missed you too, Baba," Ayanda whispered back. "But I'm here now. I'm home." For what felt like an eternity, they stood there in the middle of the hall, holding each other as the world around them faded away. In the days that followed, Ayanda returned to Johannesburg with Mandla. She moved back into the small house where she had grown up, reuniting with her sisters, who had grown into beautiful young women in her absence. Nandi and Zinle were overjoyed to have their big sister back, and even Thando, now a curious little girl with her mother's eyes, clung to Ayanda, fascinated by the older sister she barely remembered. But Ayanda wasn't just coming home to be part of the family again. She had a plan. With the help of the Kumalos and the connections she had made during her treatments, Ayanda had established the Nomusa Hope Foundation, named after her mother. The foundation was dedicated to providing medical care to children with leukemia in underprivileged communities, ensuring that no family would have to make the same difficult decision that Mandla had been forced to make. Ayanda's foundation quickly gained attention, drawing support from both local and international donors. The work she did was personal for her, and every child she helped reminded her of the sacrifice her father had made for her. She dedicated herself to the cause, and with Mandla by her side, the foundation grew rapidly, helping thousands of children across the country. As the months passed, the family that had once been fractured by grief and hardship began to heal. Mandla's pride in his daughter knew no bounds. He had always known she was strong, but seeing her use her strength to help others made him realize just how remarkable she truly was. His other daughters, too, thrived under Ayanda's guidance. Nandi, always the creative one, took up a leadership role in the Foundation's outreach program, while Zinle, now a teenager with a heart as big as her father's, helped organize fundraisers and community events. Even Thando, though still young, had found her place in the bustling household, following Ayanda around like a shadow, eager to learn from her big sister. Life was still not easy. There were days when the weight of the past threatened to resurface, when Mandla still questioned the choices he had made. But every time he looked at his daughters, at Ayanda, Nandi, Zinle, and Thando, he was reminded that love had been at the heart of every decision. He hadn't failed them. He had given them a future. One evening, as the sun set over Johannesburg, casting a warm golden light over the small house, Mandla sat on the porch, watching his daughters play in the yard. Ayanda was laughing with her sisters, her face full of joy, and Mandla couldn't help but smile. "No, Musa," he thought. "I hope you can see them. I hope you know I kept my promise. Our daughters are strong, and they're going to change the world." In that moment, surrounded by the laughter and love of his family, Mandla knew that everything would be okay. He had given up so much, but in the end, he had gained even more. His family was whole again, and for the first time in years, Mandla felt a deep, abiding peace. The journey had been long and painful, filled with loss and sacrifice, but now, standing on the other side, Mandla realized that love had carried them through, and in that love, they had found not just survival, but hope, joy, and a future filled with endless possibilities. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mandla remained on the porch, savoring the beauty of the moment. The orange and pink hues of the sky seemed to mirror the warmth he felt in his heart. His daughter's laughter echoed through the yard, filling the air with a sense of completeness that he hadn't felt in years. He watched Ayanda chase after her sisters, her smile wide and carefree. The weight of the world, the struggles they had faced, all seemed to melt away in that instant. A soft voice broke his reverie. "Baba, are you okay?" Ayanda had walked over, sitting next to him on the old wooden bench. Mandla turned to her, his eyes still misty with emotion. "I'm more than okay, my girl. I'm proud of you. So proud. You've become everything I ever hoped for and more." Ayanda smiled softly, resting her head on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you, Baba. Everything I've done, everything I've become, is because of you." Mandla shook his head. "I almost lost you. I made decisions that still haunt me. But seeing you like this, seeing the person you've become, I realize now that love was the only choice I ever had." "You never lost me, Baba," Ayanda said quietly, squeezing his hand. "You gave me life, not just once, but twice. When you gave me to the Kumalos, you didn't give me away. You gave me a chance to survive, and because of that, I'm here today. I'm home." Mandla smiled, the last of his doubts finally easing. For so long, he had carried the burden of guilt, unsure if he had made the right choices. But here, with Ayanda beside him, and the laughter of his other daughters filling the air, he knew that love had guided him every step of the way. "Your mother would be proud of you, Ayanda. She would be proud of all of us." Ayanda lifted her head, her eyes shining. "I like to think she's watching over us. She's the reason I named the foundation after her, the Nomusa Hope Foundation. It's her legacy, too. And together, we'll make sure it keeps growing. We'll help as many children as we can, just like you helped me." Mandla nodded, filled with a sense of contentment he hadn't known in years. The grief of the past had finally given way to a future filled with hope for Ayanda, for Nandi, Zinle, Thando, and for all the children Ayanda's foundation would touch. As the evening deepened into night, Mandla rose from the bench, pulling Ayanda up with him. "Come on, let's go inside. Your sisters are going to want to hear the story about how you won that award again." Ayanda laughed, shaking her head. "They've already heard it 100 times. They'll want to hear it 100 more, Mandla said, chuckling as they walked back toward the house, side by side. The warmth of the house greeted them, the smell of dinner still lingering in the air. Nandi and Zinle were already at the table, playfully arguing about whose turn it was to help with the dishes, while Thando sat nearby, drawing pictures of the family. Mandla stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in. His family, his daughters. His heart swelled with love and pride as he realized just how far they had come. They had faced loss, suffering, and hardship, but through it all, they had stayed together, bound by love, and now they were thriving, ready to face whatever the future held. He joined them at the table, feeling the warmth of their presence surround him. Ayanda sat beside him, and as they ate, they shared stories, laughed, and dreamed about what was to come. That night, as Mandla lay in bed, he thought back on the long journey that had brought them here. He thought of Nomusa, of the sacrifices he had made, and of the love that had carried him through. And for the first time in years, he slept peacefully, knowing that his family was whole, that his daughters were safe, and that the future was filled with endless hope. In the morning, as the sun rose over Johannesburg, casting its light over their small house, Mandla knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, and with that thought, he smiled, his heart full, his soul at peace. The journey had been long, but in the end, love had prevailed, and it always would. The end. Did you enjoy this story? Kindly let me know in the comments section, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting African folk tales.